We're going to start ancient and medieval political thought. We're going to start with Thrasymachus, and we're going to go from there to try to get at least, if we can, to the city of pigs, but we'll see how that goes. I'm setting up two different sources to record. So, bear with me in case the audio quality is not as good as it normally is. So, well, at least where it hopefully normally is. I'm not saying it's normally good. I'm just saying it's probably better than what it is today. So, let's go ahead and start out just by talking about Thrasymachus's definition of justice. So we know he comes in like a wrecking ball. You know, we're told he's like a wild animal. At times he's described as being like a vulture. So he's accused Socrates of being the one who is really a sophist or sophist. And what is a sophist again? What does that mean? Okay, someone who uses fallacies and deceives people, right, to make an argument.
Oh, I was just going to say the exact same about theological fallacies.
Good. And one way maybe you guys are both right about that. So there's someone who uses techniques, logical techniques, to kind of lead people to the conclusions that they want them to get to, not because those conclusions are true, but because the sophist is looking for a certain outcome. They are trying to use argumentation and logic to get to a certain conclusion that they already chose, that they already want. And a lot of times they're doing that because they're paid to do that. Like someone is paying for them to make that conclusion and to persuade people. A way you would see it phrased in the text is that a sophist is someone who makes the weaker argument the stronger. The weaker argument the stronger. And there's something really cynical about this type of person, because basically they're not interested in using their intelligence or in sort of helping people to use their intelligence to come to conclusions about, difficult questions or things that could be otherwise. They want power, right? And so they want to move people along the path they want them to go, just because that's what benefits them. So Thrasymachus, this is what Socrates definitely thinks about him. But one of the interesting things that happens is that he accuses Socrates of being a sophist. He says, you confuse us, you use these fancy words, you make people think that they agree with you by confusing them and using all these tricks. The dialectical method that you use is basically just a fancy schmancy type of sophistry that is even worse because it pretends to be virtuous, and in reality just accomplishes the same thing. Now, go back to the idea that the sophist is the person who makes the weaker argument the stronger. The focus is on strength. How does strength relate to Thrasymachus' definition of justice?
The advantage of the stronger over the weak.
Very good. Okay, literally, his definition of justice, and write this down, is from 338c. He says, justice is simply the advantage of the stronger. Justice is simply the advantage of the stronger. He says, he lays out a pretty tall order. He says, I'm going to refute the notion that justice is good. I'm going to refute the notion that the just man does good to himself and others. I'm going to refute the notion that people benefit from being just, and I'm going to refute that there's a common good justice seeks. So it's a complete attack, right? Justice isn't good. The just man doesn't do good for himself or for others. Someone who pursues justice does not benefit from it. Someone who receives justice does not benefit for it. There's no common good that justice can help us find. Well, justice is simply the advantage of the stronger, but who is the strong?
The rulers.
The rulers, very good. Those who hold power in the city, those who are sovereign in the city. And this, Thrasymachus says, it differs everywhere. Some cities are cities that are run by tyrants. Some are cities that are run by aristocrats. Some are cities that are run by masses. It doesn't matter, right? It's not just the tyrant who everyone sees is sort of having this problem of pleonexia and excessively grabbing for power. He's not the only one who is unjust. It's anyone who holds power whatsoever, even the forms of power that we might think of as less brutal or more virtuous, like aristocracy. All of it. Anyone who holds power, definitionally, they are the strong, right? And justice, whatever they say justice is, whatever they do in accord with justice, however they run the city according to justice, is always what benefits them. It's aimed at their benefit. Now, one mistake that can happen, again, this is just my opinion, as someone who's read The Republic a lot, is that, it's kind of set up in the first 3 definitions of justice like that. It's like sumo wrestling between interlocutors, and that Socrates defeats them all, right, and moves on to the next one, and he owns them. Watch Socrates. Oh, Thrasymachus. It's not like that. He does make some good points, and he tries to poke holes, right, in the other interlocutor's position, but he doesn't do it decisively, and I don't even think it's meant to be decisive. I think it's meant to lay groundwork for the future of everything that we're going to talk about, right? And so, as it is with Cephalus and Polemarchus, it is also with Thrasymachus. He's going to poke around a bit, but he's not going to have a decisive refutation of the idea that justice is only the advantage of the stronger. One thing he does, one thing he counters, he says, well, what if the ruler wants something he thinks is to his advantage, but he's mistaken, Like, what if you're Napoleon and you think that it's a great idea to have a land war in Russia, right? He thinks that's advantageous, but he's wrong, clearly. Bad idea. And so, in that sense, how could you say that justice is just the will of the stronger, revenge of the stronger, revenge of the ruler? Sometimes they might be mistaken about it. Another thing Socrates raises is that there's no advantage to an art, but to be as perfect as possible at the art. So, for example, what's the advantage of medicine? If you have a doctor and all that doctor's patients die, right? If you've got someone who's seeing people and treating them for the common cold, and like 50 of them in a row end up dead, you can kind of objectively say, hey, this is not how medicine is supposed to work. The advantage of an art, the advantage of medicine is to be as perfect as possible. The good of medicine is for the body. If you have all of these dead common cold patients from one doctor, you know something's amiss. You can just talk about that in terms of the art itself. Similarly, Socrates suggests, well, the good of rule is for the ruled. Like if you're doing a good job of ruling, he says it's an art, and you can look at it kind of the way you could look at a doctor with 50 dead common cold patients. If you have a regime where there's like 10,000 dead for dissenting or something in 1 hour, you can say the art of rule is not to have 10,000 of people you're ruling dead in an hour. Okay. So the art of rule, at least in some way, has to be tied to the good of the ruled, or the good of the conditions the ruled lived under. In response to this, Thrasymachus brings something up, and he says, well, you're using this idea almost an analog, and it's one we've talked about before when we were doing the King David Book of Samuel readings, that there's this shepherd ruler, right, who rules and takes care of the benefit of the ruled. But Thrasymachus says, we all know that every shepherd who watches their sheep, they might keep them alive and protect them from lions and whatever, but at the end of the day, he's keeping them alive so he can eat them, or at least eat some of them. Right? So maybe there's a ruler who rules as an art and like lets citizens flourish, but ultimately it's so that he can get an advantage out of those citizens. He goes on to claim that rulers make the law to benefit themselves. That's a 341A. Always. How does a ruler make a law? Why does he make a law? You'll see, actually, he says, it's not for the good of the rule, but for whatever their particular interest is. He goes further and he says, look, I'm not even really, we don't even really need to blame the ruler here or talk about it in a normative way. The person who's just doesn't fare as well as the person who's not just. Okay? It doesn't make sense to be a ruler who wouldn't write the laws to benefit themselves. The just man does not fare as well as the unjust, and the unjust person is always more profitable. They're the one that's where the benefit lies, is in injustice. So 348C. And he says it might be noble, and keep an eye on the word noble, because it's one that's going to come up a lot for us in this text. But it's naive. To think that the just man would benefit is noble, but naive, meaning it's stupid. It's foolish. These are the total implications of everything that transpires in the back and forth with Thrasymachus, and there's 8 of them. and I'd write them down. So I'm going to read them slowly. You don't have to copy it word for word. Just do like a shorthand version of it. But we want to lay out. We want to have a full portrait of kind of the charge that Thrasymachus is making, the argument he's making about the insufficiency of justice and the goodness of injustice. The first is that the tyrant is the happiest of men. The tyrant is the happiest of men. The second is that the regime makes the laws, and those laws benefit those in power. The regime makes the laws, and those laws benefit those in power. Justice is simply what the law happens to be in a regime. Justice is simply what the law happens to be in a regime. Rulers are selfish and seek only their good. Rulers are selfish and seek only their good. Another implication, the fifth implication of his definition of justice is that the ruler is always right. If justice is just the advantage of the stronger, the ruler is always right. Here is another charge of Thrasymachus. People serve the strong, meaning they follow what justice requires according to his definition. People serve the strong because they don't have the nerve to be stronger. They don't follow the law because they're virtuous or good. The law is just the will of the strong, and they simply don't have the nerve to be stronger. People serve the strong because they don't have the nerve to be stronger. The seventh point. Those who act justly will be harmed, and those who act unjustly will prosper. Those who act justly will be harmed, and those who act unjustly will prosper. Well, this is we're still doing Thrasymachus, yeah. But we're gonna get into a blend of all their definitions through the mouth of Glaucon and Adeimantus in a way, in just a little bit. And number 8, finally, for Thrasymachus. Injustice equals virtue. Justice equals innocence or stupidity, or innocence and stupidity. Injustice equals virtue. Justice equals innocence and stupidity. Okay, just as a recap, we've got 3 definitions of justice on the table now. And in ways that we've discussed, they interact and build on each other, right? Socrates we're following what he says he learned from Diotima, which is that there's truth in everything. You got to try to separate the false from the true. So in each case, you have to ask yourself, what is compelling here? These three definitions are: Kepler says, justice is paying back your debts and be honest. Polemarchus says, give benefits to friends and harm to enemies. And Thrasymachus says, justice is the advantage of the stronger. Now, Thrasymachus comes in and, like, he's hardcore. And if you were watching this, like, on TV or something, you feel like, oh man, he kind of tore him apart. At least that's how I felt the first time I read this. The first time I read it, I was like, God, Socrates' answers really suck. And then, as I kept reading, Socrates goes on this, what to me seemed like, this is the first time I read it, of course, like rambling in this interlude on virtue. He's like, the virtue of the eye is blah, 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 and the virtue of the ear is da, 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 da. And I'm like, what? Like, this is weird. I'm not getting what this is even doing here. Okay, this is an example, and you guys might have gotten this without having to be told, in which case you're way ahead of the game and you aren't like me when I was in college. This is a really important part, this interlude on virtue that happens right after his encounter with Thrasymachus. It's a definition of virtue, and it is essential for the rest of the book.
He introduces the idea of the tripartite soul in that one, right?
Well, in a way, yes, in a way, exactly. He sets us up for it, and especially when he gets to the question of what is the virtue of the soul. Very good. Socrates is giving an incomplete answer about what virtue is, but it's going to guide the rest of the discussion. So he says, what is the function of the eye? You guys, what is the function of the eye, you guys? To see. Good. What is the function of the ear? Hearing. What is the function of the pruning knife? I don't know if you guys know what a pruning knife is, but like if you're a gardener and you've got to peel back dead or unfruitful growths, or you could use a pruning knife like if you've got to cut a fruit and you want to eat parts and like avoid the pit or whatever.
What's a tool?
It's a tool. Very good. How's a pruning knife different from a knife?
It has its own like its own class or its own like job instead of like just using like a butcher's knife to like a massive one that's like just built for it. Yeah, very good contrast, right? A pruning knife differs from a butcher's knife in the sense that a butcher's knife is just meant to hack, right? It's just about it's about blunt force. I mean, it's sharp, but it's about strength, and you're not looking for precision. But a pruning knife has to have sharpness to it, but also it has to be shaped in a way that allows for precision, right? And this is going to determine a lot of things about its structure that are going to be different, for example, from how a butcher's knife is constructed. The function is what a thing alone can do, or what it does better than anything else. So this is part of why the pruning knife example is useful. Because like if you contrast a pruning knife and a butcher knife, you can see they're both knives, right? But if you're looking to prune something, you're not gonna prefer the butcher's knife, you're gonna want the pruning knife. So the function is what a thing alone can do, or what it does better than anything else. So he's introducing the three classes in the city, kind of.
And he's laying the groundwork for it. Good, right? So if I'm going to step up and write on the board, every function has a virtue, okay, or an arete, and this is going to guide a lot of the rest of the discussion. So we defined a function, or he did, and then every function has a virtue, arete, right, which is the excellence, or what makes something excellent.
So the virtue of an eye would be to see well, right? The virtue of an ear would be to hear well. The virtue of a pruning knife is to be sharp and precise and adept. You don't say the virtue of the pruning knife is to be shiny. I mean, maybe, I like having pretty knives in my kitchen, but if I have a pretty knife that isn't precise and sharp as a pruning knife, it doesn't matter, right? The excellence is in its sharpness and its precision. Socrates says things have a proper work. That's called the function. And if you can identify the function, he says you can find what he calls the corresponding excellence. That's the virtue. Without that corresponding excellence, without that associated virtue, the thing could not function. It could not function well, at least. And here we get at 353D to a really interesting moment. That's kind of the core of everything else that's going to go on later. What is the function of the soul? Do you guys remember this part? What is the function of the soul? I always think this is a really weird moment. I remember being kind of surprised by the answer. What is the function of the soul? Does anyone remember? Actually, I think someone said it like 2 classes ago. What is the function of the soul? Bless you. It's a weird answer. It's ruling, deliberating, and living. The function of the soul is ruling, deliberating, living. The soul's some sort of thing then that seems to manage the person. It's going to have to manage the parts of the soul. There's some kind of connection to the body. The soul's function is to rule, deliberate, live, manage. An important question for the rest of the dialogue is, what is the virtue of the soul? The function of the soul is ruling, deliberating, living, managing. What is the virtue of the human soul? And here, I think the implication is, though it's not proven, that the virtue of the soul matters a lot, and matters a lot in the context of the 3 definitions we just went through with these 3 guys. The virtue of the soul is justice. A soul that rules, deliberates, manages, and lives well is just. This is your first intimation of what Socrates' real understanding of the definition of justice is. Okay, this is your first intimation of it. Any questions before we move on from there? Or that's the implication, yeah.
And you're gonna expand on that in book 3 and 4 like crazy.
Yeah, all the way up until the end. It's really, he's this is the whole reason he embarks on what's called the city and speech, right? In the first place is because you can make this parallel between managing, ruling, deliberating, living. Coincidentally, That's what a city does. Okay, so that's what human soul does. It's also what a city does. And that's why you can make the parallel between the city and the soul at all. Now, I like this part a lot. You got Glaucon and Adeimantus. What did you guys notice about them, like, and their characterization? What did you guys notice about them as characters?
Glaucon helps develop the idea of the city, and Adeimantus just kind of focuses on like wealth.
Okay, good. Right, okay, so you've got Glaucon. Glaucon seems to be kind of maybe more interested in like planning and discussing, debating particulars of how to build a city, about politics and that kind of thing. And Adeimantus seems to be really kind of interested maybe in like pleasure,
Pleasure and money. And
money,
luxury,
wealth, power,
Mhm.
art. Good. What else did you guys, anything else you noticed about him?
He questions this like the specific like class of the guardians, and this is kind of where later in the book where you get into it. But he questioned the idea of like how can some because the guardians are just there to protect the city, nothing more, nothing less, like just
Right,
protect it.
right. The problem, they kind of realize the practical problems of both the city of pigs and the city in speech. They're clearly different from each other in terms of their interests, but they also kind of tag team. They're best buds.
And he kind of questions or Adeimantus questions Socrates on like justice or happiness.
Yes, very good. And Adeimantus, unsurprisingly, remember, he's the one who's interested in like pleasure, wealth, power, things like that. He's really focused on happy. He's the one that really pushes the issue of
Hedonism.
justice and happiness seem to be in conflict, right? Yeah, he sounds like a hedonist sometimes. He's really interested in the life of pleasure, and part of him is like, why would I? What's the draw of justice if it's unpleasant, right? Very good. Anything else you guys notice? One thing I noticed, and I'm 40 now, so the first time I read this book, I was 18. And to just date myself, my point though is that I've read it a lot, and so I've gotten a chance to experience it at different times in my life. And when I was young and I read it for the first time when I was 18, this part with Glaucon and Adeimantus, I really, really identified with them. Because one of the things they did that I remember feeling, I mean, this is how I felt at that age, was that they really want justice to be real. They are actually, literally, as they present it, terrified by the possibility that Thrasymachus raises about the world. They don't want the world that they're growing up in to be one of what Thrasymachus describes, this brutal world where there is no justice, there is just strength. There is no truth, right? There's just benefit, and only benefit for some. They don't want any of that to be true. It horrifies them. But they also kind of can see what he's saying. Whatever experience of life they've had, it's not hard for them to think of people who have responsibility as tyrants, as people who use that responsibility for their own benefit, their own interest, and not for the sake of those that they have responsibility over. And most people by their age have experienced that. Perhaps young people experience that more than most in some ways because, especially when you're a child, you don't have authority, right? You don't have a way of resisting power. You have to live in a world of rules and orders made by someone else. God willing, that is someone else who has your interest in mind. What's good for you and what makes you happy in mind. But if they don't, you don't have much you can do in response to it. So it makes sense that Glaucon and Adeimantus are the ones who are at once the most terrified by the idea that Thrasymachus is right, but the most kind of inclined to think, yeah, I have a hard time imagining how, in the end, what he says is not correct. Now, as you pointed out, there's differences between Glaucon and Adeimantus. They work together as a team. It's really good that you're nailing down kind of like these subtle differences between them. At this point in the dialogue, it's Glaucon, right? The one who's kind of more interested in setting up the city and speech and thinking about how it's arranged and stuff like this, is Glaucon who wants to know why Socrates thinks justice is good. He's like, please tell me, Socrates, why is justice good? Persuade me. Like, undo all these tears that Thrasymachus has made arise in my mind. Show me that justice isn't just real, but that it's good. And this is super important. And remember, we've been tracking this since basically at the beginning of the course. This idea that there's a difference between the goods of virtue and the goods of effectiveness, right? Between good in the sense of being good and good in the sense of victory or winning or getting the stuff, right? Or having things go in your favor and your interest. And that's been out there since day one. Glaucon wants to know that justice is good, specifically good in a very particular sense. And here he offers 3 different categories of goodness. He only wants one of these categories of goodness to be the one that Socrates uses, right? That sense of goodness is the one he's interested in. Do you guys remember the 3 categories of goodness? No, okay, very good. Things, you said things for their advantage, things that are good for the advantage they give, things that are good in themselves or for their own sake, and things that are good for both. Those are the 3 categories. So just to restate them, there's 3 categories of goodness. Things that are good for their own sake, and these type of things tend to have a good that is immediate, like a benefit that's immediate, and not necessarily something beyond it. Like a good example of it might be harmless pleasures, things that are good for their own sake. Like flaming hot Cheetos for me are good for their own sake. I could eat those every day, all day. There's a reason I don't buy them and keep them in my home. No one's going to be like, yeah, flaming hot Cheetos are such an important part of a complete, nutritious, balanced diet, right? But they just taste really good. They taste really, really good. I really like them. They're good. They're pleasurable. And as long as I'm not eating mountains of them, we wouldn't call them harmful. Okay, but then you have things that feel harmful at the moment that have a long positive effect over time. This could be different things for different people, but I can only kind of give examples from my experience. I hate going to the dentist. I hate it. I don't like having to be there with my mouth open, and I don't like them having to be there in my mouth. And that's not even to talk about whatever they have to do in my mouth, right? I don't like it. But I do like having teeth, and I do like having teeth that work well, and I do like, having, my teeth clean and all that stuff, right? So I wouldn't say that going to the dentist is pleasurable, but it's good. And I can recognize the advantage in it. Similar with exercise. I'm not someone who likes exercise. I like yoga, which I guess is exercise, maybe. But like, there are some people who are like really into it and they enjoy it and it's fun for them to do, right? But I kind of get bored by it. I kind of feel like, what am I doing when I'm walking on a treadmill or something like that? But there's lots of benefits from exercise. We do it, some people do it because they love it. Some people do it because it's good for them, right? And if they could do something else and it would be good for them, they would. The last category is things that are good for their sake and for what comes from them. Okay? They're good for their own sake and they're good for their benefit. This is the highest sense in which something can be good. This is the highest sense in which something can be good. The kind of classic example here is health. Like, being healthy is pleasurable. Like, if you've been healthy for a lot of your life, you might not realize how pleasurable it is until you get sick. Yeah, then you're like, wow, okay, I didn't realize how good it felt to have health. Or also its benefits, how useful it is to be healthy, how much becomes complicated when you lose health.
Which research justice is in from each? I guess probably the Adeimantus and Glaucon. It might be in number 2.
That's the whole question, right? Okay, fantastic.
People are going to be just only for the benefit.
Right. This is the question. What category does justice go in? What category of goodness does justice go in? Because what Glaucon says is, look, what I want it to go in, Socrates, and what I want you to make the case for is that it's this highest form of good, that it's good for its own sake and for what comes from it. And that's where he places it. Good in itself and good for its benefits. But as you pointed out, Glaucon suspects it's actually something else. He says that people say, actually, justice is kind of like medicine. Or the way I describe the dentist. Or the way I describe exercise. It's unpleasant, but there's good effects from justice. This is what Glaucon thinks, if he had to say. He hasn't, he's not jumping up and down at the fact that he has to be just. Justice can feel painful sometimes for him. Like, maybe he would like to take all the money. Maybe he doesn't want to pay his taxes. But in the long run, it's beneficial. This means, and I write this down, that justice, on Glaucon's argument, or his fear is that, well, if justice does exist at all, one of the things he's scared of is that Thrasymachus is right. If it does exist at all, the best we can say for it is that it is literally an unfortunate necessity. Justice is an unfortunate necessity. What comes naturally to the human, what we would really want, is to pursue our interests. And harming others in that sense, it would come naturally to us, right? What we want is to pursue our interests. Sometimes that means taking things from people, not giving things to people. It means harm.
Stealing money.
Yes, stealing money, exactly.
So, where this idea, how does this work in the city?
How does this work in the city?
Yeah, or I guess the ideal city.
Okay, well, before we move to the ideal city, let's just start with the city, with an idea of city. How does Glaucon's good question definition of justice is an unfortunate necessity, operate in real time. It would operate something like maybe how some social contract theorists talk about law in the city. That the law is force, and force is used to make people do justice because they wouldn't actually want to do it otherwise, right? And so the point of a city is to have law in force to make people follow the just, and in the long run, they'll grow accustomed to its benefits, but it's not something that they're going to do on their own, right? It's not something they're going to do because of their immediately obvious interest or benefit. You have to use coercion. It's really a type of, for the way that Glaucon describes it, it's a very early version of the social contract. You make a rational calculation. You say, well, if the dangers of being harmed outweigh the benefits of harming others, let's all agree not to harm each other. Okay? This is how justice is an unfortunate necessity. We agree on justice not because it's good in itself and beneficial, but because we all understand that things are going to get out of control if we all pursue our interests to the point of harming each other. And because we all know we're not going to be the victor in that fight every time. Okay, maybe sometimes we will be, but sometimes we're going to be the victim. So we're just going to make this deal, right? That we're not going to commit injustice because it's in our interest not to. But the flip side of this is that what we really want, deep down in our hearts, what we would really do, if we could do it, the best life would be to do injustice without paying the price.
Yeah, I guess that's like the whole plot of what is it, like the Purges.
Yes.
Like that one.
Yes. Yeah. The Purges would be a great thought experiment for this. Yes.
So is it kind of like Thomas Hobbes' like understanding of state of human? How it's just a state of
Chaos.
It's just like the Leviathan, basically. Is that like
Yeah.
his understanding?
Good. Right. So is this just Hobbes? Right? Is this just the idea that nature, our human nature, and the nature of the world is nasty, brutish, short, and what we really want is to get as much stuff as possible, right? But then we're going to agree to the sovereign. Yeah, it is in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a reason people say that all philosophy is a footnote to Plato. This is a very early version of that. Yeah, like you would do what you could, but you're not strong enough to, and actually none of us are. And so we'll make this sort of deal because it's in our interest most of all, right? At the end of the day. But if we could be this thing that could pursue all its desires without harm, that's what we'd really want. And the best way of life would be to be able to do that, to be able to be unjust and just never pay the price. Never have anyone who could hold you to account. And along these lines, Glaucon says, then the worst life is the opposite of that. The worst life is the life where all you can do is suffer injustice and you will never be able to take revenge. The worst life is the one where you're on the receiving end of the injustice. You no ability to make it stop. What does this mean? Justice is valued only because people are too weak to do injustice. That's exactly what Hobbes says at one point in Leviathan. People are too weak to do injustice and get away with it. Justice, then, is a convention. Something being a convention means it doesn't come from nature. I write that down. It's an invention. It's a human invention that has no correlation outside of itself with something in reality, right? Or in nature. That doesn't mean it's not important, but it's invented, so to speak. And it's also, for Glaucon, then, the fact that we have justice in the way he's talking about it. It's a sign of our weakness. It's a sign of our frailty. It's a sign of our lack of power. And Glaucon ends by saying, Socrates, please explain why living the just life is good in itself. Why should we live this way? Because remember, first he says, I want to know how it's good in itself, and how it's beneficial. By the time that he gets to the end of this experiment, he says, why is living the just life good in itself? Why should we live this way, like even if we weren't forced to? Why should we live justly, even if there's not a fear of punishment that's driving it? Or like this idea of justice is an unfortunate necessity that we reluctantly agree to. Why is justice the kind of thing that is good and good in itself for its own sake? This is especially Adeimantus's line. He wants there to be a connection between justice and happiness. Okay? Not just benefit, but happiness. Living the just life should make you happy. Right? Not miserable, not, it's like you're just doing this because you're too weak to do anything else, or you're resigned to this, and you kind of wish it wasn't this way, but you have to do it. It's a miserable life. They go even further and they say, they use the thought experiment about, what if there's someone who is totally just and is being tortured on the rack for injustice? How could you say that person was happy? I mean, you might be able to say that they were just, but could you really say that someone who's being tortured for justice is happy in any meaningful sense as they're being tortured? It's interesting because Aristotle's going to say, yeah, that's kind of nuts. It's not going to, like, that there are some material conditions of happiness. But it seems that Socrates is going to suggest that someone like that in that situation could be happy. Any questions before we move to the next part? Okay. Now they're going to continue their case for injustice with the little thought experiment that we recognize from the Lord of the Rings, right? And this is with the ring of Gyges. So, well, I guess just to make the Lord of the Rings analog, what is the ring like in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings? Like, what do you do with it? Why do people want it?
Gives them power, right?
Okay, good. So the ring is a ring of power. Very good. Seemingly limitless power for the wearer. What happens to Smeagol, who becomes Golem, when he puts the ring on?
Like corrupts him and he loses his humanity.
Very good. It corrupts him. It drives him. The sort of power of the ring, it becomes his entire point for existing. Turns him into this creature from being a hobbit. And it makes him seemingly thoroughly unjust. And he's like an addict with it, right? By the end, at first it feels great and it seems to give him these things that he wants. But as time goes on, it's clearly destroying him. and yet he can't let it go. He keeps calling it his precious. And there's a similar reasoning here, right, in Plato. There's this ring called the ring of Gyges, and it's an illustration of what someone might do if they could have the invisibility to grant them limitless power, right? If you put on this ring, your power becomes extensive because you can't be seen, which means you can't be accountable for anything that you do. You could commit lots of injustice, every injustice, and never have to pay a price for it. And what they say is, in this thought experiment, anyone who put that ring on, this ring of Gyges on, would act the same way. It doesn't matter if it's the person you know that's like the most shitty person ever, or if it's the person you know who's like the best person you know at all, right? Let's say your sainted mother or whatever, the whatever person you most admire in your life or think of as being the most good, whoever they are, it doesn't matter. They would do all injustices if they put on that ring, because they could. A just man and an unjust man will behave the same way if they put on the ring. And in our time, you hear people say things like, well, character is what people do when no one's looking. And basically, Glaucon and Adeimantus are like, no one has character. No, it's not possible. It's not we're all driven by interest to the point where we would all do injustice if we could. Here's the ultimate challenge. Allow the unjust man to remain completely undetected. And not just that, but to get the greatest reputation for justice, and at the same time to have all the wealth and power. So this person not only has benefits like wealth and power at the highest level of all, but they also have the greatest reputation for justice. Everyone thinks they are the epitome of what it means to be good. And at the same time, secretly, this person would be the most unjust, most terrible man. It would be like if Jeffrey Epstein had the reputation of being like, I don't know, like, the guy who solved world hunger and, saved all the babies ever and ended pollution in the oceans and, like, just best, most philanthropic person of all. Now, remove from the person who really is the most just person the reputation of justice. Give them no chance for honor. Give them no chance for awards. In fact, give them punishment. Give them the punishment reserved for the most evil person. Let them be tortured on the rack. In some translations, let them be crucified. Let the most just man be the most unjust in the eyes of everyone. So take the most just person in the world and make him appear to be Epstein. Make him have the reputation of Hitler, while truly being entirely good. The implication in this thought experiment is that the reputation for justice is more important than justice itself. The reputation for justice is more important than justice itself. And here you have Machiavelli pop up. What really matters is appearing to be just. Not being just, but appearing to be just. And reputation or appearance matters more than reality. And the management of appearances is what really matters. I mean, what good is it if you are a just person and people think you are a cannibalistic child rapist? Like that, this is the thought experiment. What good is that? Why be good? Here's an addendum from Adeimantus. Everyone says justice is good for its benefits. But come on, even unjust people get to enjoy those benefits. Like you're making it sound like the good things that come from justice, even this reluctant necessity justice that Glaucon has talked about, are things that only justice gives you. But I mean, there are unjust people who get to enjoy benefits like stability and safety and sophistication or whatever all the time. Skill gets you by. And Odysseus appears again here. Remember I told you he's kind of like this guy who's behind all of this. Odysseus, he does unjust things all the time, like clever things that he lies, he cheats, whatever, like that. But he's admirable because in the end, he lands on his feet. He gets what it kind of doesn't matter how he gets it. What matters is what he gets in the end. And if you can be like him and you can do these tricks and stuff and end up with the benefits that come from justice, you know, you're kind of the real winner at life. You're the real, because you don't have to pay the being good tax, and you still get all of the things that come from being good. And now, you know, we're here in sort of the great fear that Homer raises for the Greeks, and one that Cephalus raises for us in this dialogue. And Adeimantus says, I mean, it kind of seems like the gods don't really care about justice, if they even exist at all. Like, if skill's enough to get you by, if you can be clever and get the benefits of justice without having to be just, you work the system, it seems like the gods don't really care whether you commit justice or injustice. And it even seems like if they are mad at you for something, if you do commit injustice, at the end of the day, all you'd have to do is just appease them with sacrifices. Just make it up to them somehow. We're back to Cephalus. Now we've ended with this challenge, like fully explicated. They want Socrates to defend justice for its own sake, not for any benefit, and to prove that injustice is harmful. There's no clever way of being unjust, right? There's no guy, no winner who like does all these terrible things and will get all the good things that come from justice at the end of the day. He's just outsmarted, right? The system. And the gods are not the kind of gods that can be bribed, is the implication, right? You'd have to have gods that would be above that transactional model where they can be bought off and they don't actually care about whether you're just or unjust. Any questions before we move on here? All right, now we get to dun, 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 the city-soul analogy, right? Okay, the tripartite soul, the city and speech. So what Glaucon and Adeimantus basically do is they're like, okay, these are the stakes. These are the stakes of this discussion after Thrasymachus has left us here, kind of torn apart. And they've laid out an order almost. And Socrates has got to give some defense of justice is good for its own sake and good in its benefits, but he's also got to have a definition of justice that can do this, right? So he has to have an answer to what is justice. And whatever he did in the first three encounters with Kepler, Polemarchus, and Thrasymachus, whatever he responded, it was not enough. It was not persuasive. This is why the city-soul analogy is closely connected to the argument that seemed like a throwaway argument about function. Okay. To answer this question that he's left with and to give his definition of justice, he's basically going to take the rest of the entire book. There's not like, you can't really, I mean, it's hard to teach Plato's Republic in any way that doesn't take you through the entire book. Because if someone just gives you like a definition or something that they find in the text somewhere, it's partial. It's incomplete, and the process is the thing that is really what gives you any insight into justice at all. But here is the beginning of the apparatus, like the heavy lifting. And it's called the Callipolis. I'd write that down. Kallipolis. The beautiful city. The beautiful city. So I'd point out something that is kind of interesting. In the discussion of justice so far, it seems like we want justice to be true. We want justice to be good. And now it seems like we're also going to say that justice is beautiful. Okay? So justice has to be good, true, and beautiful. Socrates is going to construct a city in speech to answer the question of what justice is and to answer the concerns of Glaucon and Adeimantus, the city in speech, the Callipolis, the beautiful city. He says, if we can figure out what justice is in this city in speech, we can figure out what it is in the soul. Why? Well, we already know one reason. It's from the function argument. The function of the soul is to manage, rule, deliberate, and live. So the virtue of the soul has to be doing the function excellently. What would it mean to do those things excellently? It would mean to be just. So we have the city-soul analogy because the function of the soul and the function of the city are the same thing. And the virtue of the soul and the virtue of the city are the same thing. Another reason he gives for the city-soul analogy is this example with letters. Like, if we made an inscription and I wrote, my class is the best, and I wrote it in like 8-point font, like I chiseled it in 8-point font. That could be hard for some people to see on a monument. So if I wanted it to be on a monument, I want people to see my class is the best on the monument. Then I'm going to want to make those letters pretty big, right? Like, they are not going to be able to be 8 points. They're going to have to be giant. Like, think about the lettering on monuments that you've seen. Like, it tends to have to be pretty large to be legible. So they'll say the same thing, either font size, I'm making the same statement, it's the same content. But one of them is much more clear than the other. One of them is much more accessible than the other. It's because it's magnified. It's because of its size. The city magnifies the soul for him. If we can find what justice is in the city, we can find what justice is in the soul, simply because it's a larger scale. And so you're going to get to take a closer look. the result of the city soul analogy is the rest of the book, and it's basically just a long discussion about the nature of justice that takes place alongside, it's very important to note that it's alongside a discussion of politics. When you're reading the Republic, it's really important to remember this analogy of the city and soul, because everything you're reading is on a dual track, okay? Remember the city soul analogy, because everything you're reading is in reference to the city and the soul. Okay, whatever claims being made about one is being made about the other, or for the purpose of understanding the other. I also, like I showed my cards earlier, but I don't read any of this literally. And Plato says at multiple times in the Republic, don't read this literally. Like at one point, he calls the city in speech, the Callipolis, a pattern. Okay, he says it's a pattern, meaning it's kind of like a blueprint or an examination, a generalization. It's to transmit content, but not necessarily to completely bind. It's a model, might be a better word. It's a thought experiment, and I don't think, he's actually going to be like saying, well, a good city has to have philosophers at the top. This is where Socratic irony comes in. When you see him say something, you have to ask, what is the point of saying this? What is this thought experiment or this way of thinking supposed to lead me along the lines of? What insight is it supposed to yield? Okay, so you can read it for it's not that the literal meaning doesn't matter, but the literal meaning points to something else, and it's meant to. And actually, I like that about it. It's like the city soul analogy is the same thing. There's always a dual track. You keep your mind on that as you read, you interpret, and that'll help you. All right, so next time we're going to start with the City of Pigs and get to the Fever City and the Guardian class. Okay, so that's where I want to get to for next time. Y'all are doing a really good job, and I'll see you soon.
So are we going to be covering book 4?
I'd like for you